दुआ धर्मर अंग समतर जीवन माया तार वेर पतझड़ और बसंत मन की समता ना छूटे तो सुख शांति अनंत.
Whether one is listening to this in Myanmar or from outside the country, we know it is a very difficult time for those of us who hold the Golden Land and its people in our hearts. In trying times like these, we can all use a bit more care and compassion in our lives. So on behalf of the team here at Insight Myanmar, I would like to say, in the traditional way metta is offered, may you be free from physical discomfort. May you be free from mental discomfort. May you not meet dangers or enemies. May you live a peaceful and happy life. And may all beings be free and come out of suffering. And with that, let's move on to the show. For this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast, we're talking to Michael Stein. Michael, thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to get into your journey of meditation, which certainly involves the lineage and organization of SN Goenka, but also involves other great meditator figures and teachers early on in your journey that we'll get into. Let's get right into that now. So before we get into how you started meditation and your experiences with Goenkaji and some of these other great masters, can you tell us about yourself, where you came from and growing up and your childhood and family background?
Well, I grew up in Long Beach, New York, right outside of the city, beach community. And everything was great until my mother passed away at 14. And after that, that's when I really started to need meditation. I was pretty angry, upset, and it was the 60s. And after that, sort of college, and then a lot of getting high, hanging around, got in trouble here and there, and finally, one day I decided to leave America and go to and travel a bit.
So leading up to your decision to leave America and look for answers perhaps elsewhere, just to know a bit more about your family background. You mentioned 14 was this really traumatic event with your
My
mom.
father was Viennese. He escaped in the late 30s from Austria and came to America. He was maybe 10 years older than my mother, and he owned a movie theater in Vienna. And of course, him and the whole family lost everything, and then they came here, and he started a business, and everything went fine until my mother got sick of cancer, and then sort of everything the business went out. The business started turning bad. It was a business that made these things called pants creasers, and they came out with stay pressed pants. So at the same time, my mother became sick with cancer, and his business started going bad. So he had a really, as you would say, a dukkha-filled experience at that point. And And that was it, really. That's pretty much. And I have two sisters. One who lives in Australia, married an Australian, and another sister who passed away from cancer about 13 years ago.
Hmm. And I understand your family was escaping Europe because of their Jewish background. And what kind of Jewish home were you raised? And when you faced this kind of tragedy and trauma, was there anything within the Jewish faith that helped you or your family at that time?
No, it was actually a bad experience. In the town we grew up with, there were like six temples. We went to the temple that was closest to us, which was an Orthodox temple.
Hmm.
The men sat on one side, the women sat someplace else. I went to Hebrew school for many years after school, but it never really resonated with me. And actually, after my mother died, um, an incident happened at the temple when we went to the anniversary. You went to a Kol Nidre, which was a memorial on Yom Kippur, and I had a bad experience, and I never went back.
Hmm. Right. So there was really no resources you had in terms of like family or religion or spirituality or even society or arts or creativity that you had to turn to with that trauma.
Well, I did have one thing. Is the place I grew up was a very tight community. Long Beach, we were sort of an island, really, and everybody was very close to each other, and um, everyone knew my mother. She was very involved in many things there. So I had a lot of support from my friends and other people, but nothing. So I got in a lot of trouble, but I never got in trouble, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, right, right. Now, I'm wondering about the years of all this because when you talk about going to India, you reference this being the 60s, and there's so much happening in society and arts and culture and politics at this time. I'm just thinking of myself and like my timeline of when I started meditating was the 90s and 2000s. And really, the only thing that happened in that period for like my lifetime and generation is like before and after September 11th. And other than that, it doesn't really matter all that much if you were like 95 or 98 or oh 06 or something else, because it wasn't like the 60s where it was just so chock full of really important things going on that also that aren't just happening outside but are influencing the youth culture and the inner landscape as well.
My mother passed away in 1963. I was 14. I graduated high school at 16 in 1965. And I really was not interested in college or anything. But at that point, you either went to college or you could wind up in Vietnam. So I went to
Hmm.
college, stayed there. Most of my college was basically protesting and smoking a lot of weed and getting high and doing other things of that nature. And that was in the 60s. Once I knew that I no longer had to stay in college to get out of Vietnam, that's when I left, which was 1971. I was in Europe, and Europe became, it was like, and actually it was very odd. I went to see my aunt in Vienna,
Hmm.
and actually my father showed up and showed me where, different things in Vienna from his boyhood, and he didn't know I was there, and I didn't know he was coming. So we just bumped into each other there at my aunt's house. And then from there, I went to Israel, and I wandered around Israel. I didn't really, at that point, the Israelis didn't, they liked you if you went to a kibbutz, but I had hair, I had very long hair, and I was very sort of in the anti-establishment, and the Israelis weren't that fond of that because they didn't want us to influence the young Israelis because they wanted them to be a little bit militaristic or
I
defensive.
was gonna I was gonna ask, was there not a counterculture movement in Israel at that time?
Not much at that point.
Hmm.
Happened a long time. Most of the people who came went to kibbutzes. It was a very big kibbutz movement. So as I was in India, I went down to Alat, which was where, um, and I met some guy, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to Afghanistan and probably India. You want to come?" I said, "Sounds like a good plan. Better than this."
Hmm.
I just
Hmm.
so flew to Turkey, and started the journey overland to India.
How was that?
It's like a once in a lifetime thing to do because if you do it once, you'll never do it again.
Right. Pretty
So
hard,
it's
I
funny.
imagine
Yeah, and it was all these people met at this place called the Pudding Shop, and there were people were going, and you had to leave in the fall because of winter and other things coming. And also at that point, conflict started in Bangladesh and Pakistan, India wars. So we actually got a ride in a Volkswagen bus with two surfers from California who wanted to go surfing in India. So we're in this bus and we're driving across Turkey, and we get into a car accident. The bus hits a Land Rover that's parked on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
So the bus, of course, is no longer functional, and we're in eastern Turkey, which is already Asia. Like Istanbul was sort of still, European, but once you got out past there and down, it was very Asian in that way. So we so I dislocated my toe in the accident. And they took me in a hospital, and some guy with a bloody vest snapped my toe back in. And we had to wait for the army was in charge of Turkey then. So this colonel came and to investigate the accident. So there were 5 of us lined up there, and he talks to the driver of the other car, and all of a sudden he's talking to the driver. And all of a sudden he starts yelling at him, and he starts smacking him in the face. So I said to myself, we hit him, and that's what he did to him. I said, we're cooked. So it turns out the guy was lying to him, and he just said, okay, you guys can leave. So everybody sort of split up. These couple of California guys wanted to stay with their van to see if they could fix it. But we got on a bus and got out of there and went into Iran. And through Iran, then it was the 2500th anniversary of the Peacock Throne. The Shah was still in charge. And in Iran, if they caught you smoking hash at that time, it was the death penalty. So I didn't stay long, to be the So we went through Iran into Afghanistan and got to the border of Herat, and went to the border guards. The border guards were very nice. They smoked hash with us, sold us hash. These were Afghanistan was a very different place then, very well, not like it is today. So then we, just kept taking buses and stuff to Kabul, and when we were in Kabul, we started. It was the last stop before you would go into India. At the time, it was sort of the beginning of sort of problems between Pakistan and India, and there were all these threats of the border closing. And if the border closed, you could get stuck in Afghanistan, or you'd have to fly over. At that point, I only had a couple of $100, so I didn't want to get stuck any place. So one of the other guys from California actually showed up in Kabul. This other person I was traveling with sort of got a little weird, started doing way too much drugs. So this California guy, Tim, and myself decided to, we hooked back up and we went to India. Took the bus through the Khyber Pass into Pakistan, and then we crossed the border into India. And there was all these, and we got there, maybe a month before the war started. And actually, it was very strange because we took a bus and then some trains through Pakistan, and then we got to the Indian border. And for myself, it was when I crossed the border into India and I stepped into India, I had this feeling like I was home. It was like, okay, here I am. I'm finally here. So in the very beginning, all I was interested was, smoking, there were people on this whole trail all over, people who were into spiritual, people who wanted to get high, people who were doing all these different things. So we wound up taking the train then into Delhi, spent the night in the train station, and so I got a place in Delhi to stay. It was cost us like $1 or something. And when I was there, Ram Dass was in town at that point, so went to see Ram Dass. And he was staying at the Palace Heights then. So hung around there for a day or so, and then we decided to go to Goa, which was like a Portuguese colony. So they celebrated Christmas. It was a big thing. It was before it became very popular. Now it's a big Indian resort. At that time, it was just an empty, just really nice beaches. So we took the train to Bombay and then took a boat down to Goa. We rented a house with all these people. There was 7 or 8 of us in a house, and we just hung out in Goa for a while. Beautiful beaches. And while I was in Goa, this guy I bumped into somebody I knew from home. We hung out for a while, and he started traveling with us. And I met this guy, and he said he was going to go to Bombay to sit a meditation course with this Indian man who was a businessman, and and it was a 10-day course. I said, "Oh, that's interesting." But then what happened was I didn't go because it was in Bombay, and Bombay then became under a blackout,
Hmm.
and I really had no desire to go to another Indian city. So I passed that first up. That was the first I heard about Goenka, and I passed up that opportunity.
That's still 71.
Yeah, that was 1971.
Hmm.
And he'd only been teaching for 2 years at that point.
Hmm.
And he'd only been teaching Westerners for a little over a year or so, a year and a
Hmm.
half. So from there, I traveled across to Benares and up to Kathmandu and went trekking and, did all the things that many of the so-called, you know, trek to Asia hippie stuff. And then I bumped into this Swedish woman I went out with for a bit there, and then then somebody else told me when I was in Benares that Goenka was teaching a course in Bodh Gaya at the time, and then again I passed it up. So
Mm.
I went to Kathmandu, came back down, and then I decided I wanted to stay in India longer, but I had no money,
Mm.
so I arranged. I got money sent from home from my grandmother and flew back to the States and worked all summer, and then flew back to India via. I stopped in Sweden, and then I flew back to India. And when I got into Delhi, the first thing I did was head up to Dalhousie to do a course with Goenka.
So what drove you to want to take it? This third chance, this third opportunity. When you're hearing about it, you passed on the
Because
first
I
two.
really
What?
wanted to do it. I had all these friends who had done, people I traveled
Mm.
with. Everybody was telling me about it, and
Uh huh.
it just resonated with me. But sometimes things resonate, but it's just not the right time.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I went up to Dalhousie, where he was teaching a course, and I got there a day late. I
Mm.
got there day one of the course, and he was teaching another course after that. So I said, "Oh, I'll do the next course." But I went over there, and they asked going. He said, "Oh yeah, he can start today." So that first day evening, I started the course, and the course in Dalhousie was in a hotel, and it overlooked in the Himalayas. It's a foothills of the Himalayas. It's about 7,000 feet. So they said to me, "Go to Goenkaji's room, and he'll teach, and you can start, and he'll give you, you'll take the precepts and surrender, and he'll teach you Anapana." So it turned out that the rooms were such that there was a bedroom, and then there was a sitting room in front. So Goenkaji was in the sitting room, and I went in there, and it was just Goenkaji and myself. And he started chanting a little bit, and told me I take the precepts, and he gave me Anapana, and so I had a unique experience to start off my time with him. So after that, took the course, and then I did another course, and I just, then I did a 30-day course. At that time, you could just sit any amount that you wanted. Goenkaji stayed at different places, and he stayed sometimes. Sometimes he'd teach 3 courses at a place, and you could then sit 10 days or 20 days or 30 days. So I sat a 30-day course fairly close in the beginning. And then we went to Bodh Gaya, and I went there for the first time. I had never been before. This was 1972. Uh,
Hmm.
and oh, so if you've been to Bodh Gaya, then was a little village. It wasn't built up like it was now,
Hmm.
and it was it was small. There weren't a lot of people in this. And Goenkaji was coming to do first his self course, which he used to do every year there, and then he would do a regular course afterwards. And when I got off the train from Benares to Gaya, I took a tonga, which is a horse-drawn carriage from Gaya to Bodh Gaya, which I'm just guessing now. I guess it's probably about a 3 or 4 mile drive. And I was back in my mind. I had just finished sitting 30 days. And I was sitting there and I was out and I was looking at people, and it was just like it was thousands of years ago to me,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it was just very moving experience for me to, to come to Bodh Gaya. And so Goenkaji did a self course. I didn't do the self course then. I managed. He did. He let a certain amount of people do the self course, and the other people went to the Gandhi ashram, which where Munindra lived,
Hmm.
and they did a self course there also, and the other people in the Burmese Vihara. So I managed the course at the with another person at the Gandhi ashram. The Gandhi ashram was right in the center of Bodh Gaya, not far, maybe not far from the temple.
Hmm.
And after that, Goenkaji did a regular course, and I sat that, and then they left, and I started. Everybody left, and Goenkaji was going to Bombay then. A lot of people, we would follow him around then, but I sort of at that point needed a little break,
Hmm.
so so the friend and I went up to Darjeeling to hang around and do things. And when I was up at Darjeeling, I went to see Kalu Rinpoche, which was very is he was very very powerful and very calm and great person.
Hmm.
And so I went there, and then I sat there with him at in Sonada, which was his temple, where his monastery was, and they did a thing which you took refuge with him and stuff. And so I did that, and he hit me on the head, and it was like all of a sudden the top of my head just completely opened up. Well, it was it was a pretty moving type of experience at that point.
Hmm.
And I didn't see him again for another 6 years. No, I saw him again. He came to Rajgir when Goenkaji was there, and that was the only couple of times I saw him.
So that's really interesting, and there's a couple of things I'm wondering about as you're weaving this really delightful tale, the imagery of this kind of caravan of these hippies that are going overland to India, and how they're the culture, the counterculture that's being formed, obviously in protest to Vietnam and other countercultural things that are happening at that time, predominantly in the West, and trying to understand just what it felt like a bit more in that crowd, which is really a time lost to us in history. I mean, of course, India is still India, and it's attracted Westerners for ages and will continue to. But this particular moment in time of the way it was attracting them and the way it was affecting them, of course, not just with meditation and Goenka, but everything from the Beatles to anything else that's getting at the heart of the West. And I'm thinking of how, like in the discourses, in the 10-day discourses, I think it's on day 9 or day 10, Goenka has this line that always draws a laugh, where he talks about you come to India and you do this and you do that, and then you do the Goenka trip, you do the
Yeah,
Goenka, and the way that it always made sense to me then, but the way that you're describing this counterculture activity in India, and how you're coming together with different hippies coming apart. You're talking, some people are more interested in this, some are more interested in that, some don't really know what they're interested in, and maybe suddenly they get pulled by this or that thing, that it's kind of hitting that context where you, in with this kind of escapism or adventure or looking for something new that's happening at the time, Goenka is but one of several themes, I'm sure, that are revolving around and starting to be discussed along with other ones. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of flesh out that imagery for us. And, and I ask this also because sometimes when we look back on history and we're today, we know what happened with Goenka. We know the mass movement it became in these centers all around the world and teacher appointments and everything else. And so there could be a way of kind of superimposing where we are now back on this being the predominant thing, and this and having a view of it that links right to what it's built with today. But at the time it takes a different shape because it's but one of several competing themes that are happening with the other people that are interested. And so I'm wondering if you can take, as much as your memory is able to, take us back to what it felt like in those years of the role that it was playing, how it was being talked about, how it was being known, where it was fitting in with other parts of that counterculture and community.
Well, you have to realize that there were people from all over the world then. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, there were a lot of Europeans, Australians, people from the States. All who had traveled, and you would keep meeting the same people in different places at different times. Maybe you meet them in Goa, you'd meet them in Benares, you'd see them in Kathmandu. People, I had people I met on a train in Pakistan, and I was living with them in Kathmandu. It was just a very everyone was really open about things and sharing, and it was a great place. And India was India. It wasn't like, I mean, when you were in India, you were isolated then. Okay, there were no newspapers and no stuff. There was no internet. If you wanted to make a phone call to the States, you had to go to a general telephone office and book a time the next day to get a trunk line to make the call. So it was certainly, we were very isolated in our own little worlds then. And it was wonderful because I really was very happy to be isolated in a completely different climate
Mm,
and when I mean a climate, a completely different mental climate. It was a
mhm.
whole different thing. It had very little to do with, European, Judeo Christian, things. It was things that you never even thought about.
Yeah.
As you were saying, is that there were people who went to some Indian teachers. There was Nim Curly Baba, there was the Dalai Lama, there was Kalu Rinpoche, there were Obag. What was it? There were people who were just starting. There was Sai Baba. So different people went to different places and different yoga and different this, and everybody sort of got along. And there was Manindra teaching, and so everybody sort of did their own things and then came back and shared stuff with each other and said, and one of the things what a lot of people, it wasn't strict. There wasn't rules and regulations or anything then, right? So every people would say, "Oh, you got to go do a course with Goenka. It's great," And I mean, there are a lot of people around who now. Like I was there with Sharon, with Joseph, Danny Goldman. There was a lot of people who are now my age in their 70s who were there at that time. And we were all friends and we all did a lot of things together. And I'll get on later on what we did when we finally came back. But it was funny. We stayed in the plains of India during the winter. And we would go up to the mountains in this to get out of the heat. And every little sort of hill station a lot of hill stations had their own little thing. In Dalhousie, it was mostly Goenka people. Nainital is where people who were with Nim Curly Baba went, and Ramdas. And then there was, if you were Tibetan, you would wind up either going to Darjeeling or you would go to Dharamsala. So it was like different groups, but there was everybody liked each other. There was no animosity, nothing with anybody.
Mhm.
No.
And were most people doing some form of spirituality, or were there others that were blissed out on drugs or music or
Oh yeah,
something
well
else?
that was Manali. If you wanted to get high, you went to Manali. You
Oh,
know,
I think it's the same today.
yeah, and Kathmandu.
Mhm.
There were people who just kept getting high. I was one of them from the very beginning. I mean, I could go into many stories, but we'll skip that for a while. But people would, there are a lot of people just came to India to get high, and
Sure.
and there were a lot of people who came to India to, they were trekking. People did yoga. I mean, it was so open, and there were, so many places to go, and you have to. And India was crowded then.
Hmm.
This is a fact that I always keep remembering now. India was crowded then, and there were 600 million people.
Hmm.
Now there's 1.6 billion people,
Hmm.
and from what I understand, the country hasn't developed a larger land mass. So it must be, it's incredibly crowded now. So.
Mm. And where did the kind of cultural divide, how was that manifested, or how was it overcome? And I'm thinking of, firstly, obviously, just having a lot of these counterculture Westerners who are standing out even in their own countries and even having clashes there, let alone coming to a
Oh, there was.
conservative religious country, and then within the meditative or spiritual communities as well. So within the country, and then within those particular spiritual communities and teachings that are taking place.
Some of them really liked us and stuff, and some of the people thought we were pretty weird. And they actually came out with a movie at that time, an Indian movie called Hari Krishna Hari Ram, and it was about these hippies in Kathmandu who like seduced or got some Indian people to come with them, and it became the biggest hit. After that, anytime they saw you, they'd start singing the theme to it. It was quite funny. But it depends where you were and who you were and how you behave towards them.
Mhm.
If you were nice and did this, there were also too in that time there were a lot of people still left over in Nepal and not so much in India who were in the Peace Corps who
Mhm.
were around, and Indians in Nepal they loved America. They liked the American. It wasn't very easy in the beginning during the Bangladesh War
Mhm.
because the Americans helped Pakistan, which was not what the Indians wanted that to happen.
Mhm.
They were sort of a little anti-American at that point.
Mhm.
So
Right, and then how about within the spiritual communities you're going?
I don't think he could. I didn't think he really couldn't believe it at first.
Mhm. Goenka couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, he did and he didn't. But there were all of these people coming. Wearing Indian clothes and this and that, long hair. But what he did say afterwards was all the people came and they worked really hard. So
How
he
did he understand the hippies? Because, I mean, this movement was it was taking off in real
he
time. It
didn't
wasn't
care.
like you had historical context to understand who
All,
these
all
people
he
were
cared
and where they're coming from.
all he cared about was you came and you wanted to learn meditation and you worked hard
Mm.
and you learned meditation and you kept coming. And
Hmm.
after a while, he got to know you personally, a lot of us.
Mhm.
But he was very open to that. I mean, he was a very high end Indian. He wasn't not like the people you see in the street. He was a very well to do business person at the time. But he accepted us. He used to joke about it later. You know, when he first saw you, and part of him was like, "What are these people?" I mean, underneath you, I'm sure he was thinking, "What are these people like?" It was like an invasion, but we were fine together. Again, it was sort of a similar type of thing. I mean, I knew most of I knew Mr. Coleman, Hover, Dennison pretty well. And, when they saw you were serious and you were meditating, and by that time, too, we weren't as freaky as we were. We
Yeah.
were a little bit more under control. And we were, more, wanting to learn meditation and keep practicing and stuff. But
Yeah.
you couldn't go to Burma then.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
couldn't do these things. Those people were, and there is generational. They were like your parents' age or something.
Mhm.
But we all got along afterwards pretty well. In the beginning, everybody, that your first reaction to anything is you react to stuff from your preconditioning. So your first reaction might not have been so, good, but afterwards, when you got to know each other, everybody was very close. Almost all of us were more in tune with we were in tune to Goenkaji, nothing else.
How so? What do you mean by that?
Well, he was our teacher. They were just people who studied, who were, people with him, and we did courses with them, but it was never the same type of thing.
Right. Right. Your first teacher is always your first
The
teacher.
first teacher is the most important,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it is. And as you were first coming to take these courses with Goenka, of course, the most of the people in this countercultural movement they're searching for something outside where they're coming from. That's obvious, but they're also doing it through drugs, intoxicants, free sex, other kinds of things that are violating Shila, the five precepts. And so, how did this start to clash in those early courses as they saw this kind of in line with their other experiments? And Goenka probably saw it a very different way.
He was not, um, he was not that heavy about it at that point. If you went to talk to him, he would tell you, but there were no rules and stuff. If there were, I think the first courses, okay, were complete. Okay, they were not done in silence. You were silent on day 4, day 6, and day 8. Women and men talked all the time to each other. You could smoke beaties during the course. It wasn't strict and stuff at that point. You know, and there were people who did probably, and there were people I know who did get high during a course or something.
Hmm.
But Goenkaji sort of tolerated all of it for a while
Hmm.
until he didn't. But it wasn't this strict thing that you have now, and
Hmm.
um, so he just Goenkaji just wanted to teach you. He just wanted to share with you. He just not teach you. He wanted to share, and he wanted to give what he had to all of us. So he was
Hmm.
willing to put up with a lot.
Oh, that's really beautiful. It's really remarkable too, just to think of this conservative Hindu who grew up his whole life in Burma, was kicked out with a military dictatorship, learned a meditation outside of his own tradition, and then is bringing that back in his home country, which he didn't grow up in, to a counterculture movement that is just about as different to anything he could have imagined until that interaction.
Yeah, yeah. But he was a remarkable person that way. His whole part of life was to share the Dhamma with people.
Hmm.
And as times went on, things obviously changed. That we'll go. We can talk about later and stuff. But
Hmm.
in the very beginning, he was very tolerant of all of us. Um, and he told us later, he said he couldn't believe it. And he had his wife with him, and
Yeah.
she wasn't there in the very beginning, but afterwards. And he also had Yadav, who was his secretary, who was with him the whole time.
Hmm.
His sons hired Yadav to be his secretary, and he traveled with him.
Hmm. Those early courses must have been wild too, because they're just yeah, I mean, you're making some of it up as you go along with not in terms of the practice or the teachings, but in terms of the structure and reciprocal for and the student that body that's coming in. There's no roadmap for any of that.
Oh no. This is what I find that people fail to understand the wrong
Yeah.
way.
Uh-huh.
That without Goenkaji, there was no thing of teaching these courses like they are. Everybody who's teaching courses, these 10-day periods, other teachers and other things, all of them picked this up from Goenkaji's way. Okay.
Mhm, absolutely.
And Manindra was teaching. Manindra didn't teach courses like this. He was teaching at the time, but he didn't teach like this. Nobody, and to order and be able to order and sort of play this out. He was the one who sort of figured out a way to do this, a way that would work, and he kept fine tuning it as time went on. But without him, there would be, let's put this: without him, there wouldn't be much of a movement here in the states, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, I totally agree, and I'm referencing now this line that Gil Fronsdale wrote about the way that meditation is thought of, and he was saying that this the mere imagery of the idea of a 10-day course has become so powerful that in 2023 it's almost hard to imagine a meditation experience outside of that, because we're almost by this point so conditioned by this being kind of the only reciprocal we can imagine. And I think it's that's kind of a more recent thought or reflection on it. But I think going back to the era that you're describing, it's that this has become so commonplace and so understood within every aspect of like Western culture, as amazing it is to say, that yes, I mean, sometimes we forget what came before. It doesn't seem like anything came before because that's how it always was.
And there was no Dhamagiri then. There was no meditation centers. Okay,
Uh-huh.
And Goenka, we would go at Burmese Viharas, one in Benares. The Benares one was very good. It was in between the bus station and the train station. So you could imagine, and there were 200 people in there in a space that you couldn't imagine,
Yeah.
And we didn't, when you sat in the hall, you didn't move. You know why? If you moved, you hit the person next to you.
Yeah.
So it was a very different. And a lot of us went from one site to another. He taught at hotels, at different ashrams, wherever somebody would set up a thing, he would teach. But there weren't any centers, so there wasn't any sort of big. He set up a trust in Bombay, but it really didn't do much except eventually buy Dharmakir. You know,
Hmm. And the students are they basically like half Indians and half hippies, or
he
how's that
took
looking?
courses in both English and in Hindi.
So separate courses?
Yes,
Oh, okay, so you're not sitting side by side Indians. You have one
there
for
were, there
Indians
were
and
a couple of Indians who did sit with us and who
mhm,
used to travel around with us, um, who we became really close with. But for most of the time, the English courses were mostly English, and we could sit Hindi courses too. I
mhm.
sat, and those courses were mostly in Hindi. Um, so
Mm,
yeah,
as Goenka's getting this off the ground, I actually I didn't realize that he was doing these, kind for lack of a better word, segregated, in terms of the Hindu for the Indians and English for everyone else.
it was more language issues than anything else.
Sure, sure, sure. But it makes me wonder if there became a difference in his style of delivering these courses to these different
Yeah,
audiences.
he did. He made he okay. This is he wanted to make sure that the Indians would get better. We used to get milk at 9 o'clock at night in the first courses because he set up things to make it very easy for the Indians. He said the Indians were, they had much. His line was the Indians had very good Sheila, but they didn't really want to work as hard. The Westerners had really bad Sheila, but they worked really hard. So so he did both of he did them all over, um, from Bombay to Madras to all over the country. And a lot of us and there was some famous, there was an Indian movie star and some other people who, did courses with him.
Mm, mhm. So I'm curious and just staying for a moment in this phase of this, I guess what I call like the experimentation phase, where you don't have centers, you don't have a roadmap, you're kind of refining things and looking and reflecting after each course to look at what went well and what you hadn't thought of that you now have to think of next course. And you're in the mix of all that, sitting and then serving these courses as the just the very nature of what a course is starting to take shape. What kind of comes to mind when you think of that creative process of trying to figure out, okay, what do I got? How do we have to deliver it? What's working? What's not? What do you remember from that stage of experimentation?
It was very different then in the fact that everything was laid out. The only thing that did service as was managers of the courses, except at the very end we started cooking, but they had cooks hired. And in those days, Goenkaji still didn't. You paid for the course, but you only paid the place that was having it for the food and the other stuff. Goenkaji still never took money. That happened on the free, everything being free, no charge, happened much later. Okay, so we just kept going. Uh, there were some courses that were pretty wild, let's say the least.
Mhm. Can you give us any examples?
Okay, well, the course in Benares was pretty crazy because the first couple of days they didn't have food, and the cooks
Hmm.
and they sent out to the railroad station. We had like this vegetables, and it seemed like they were soaked in motor oil.
Oh,
To eat. It was horrible. And but somehow or another, the whole thing got in. The wildest course probably was this course in Pratapgarh, which was a little bit of an Indian gentleman built this um, meditation center for Goenkaji somehow or another, which he never really used. So he invited him to come teach a course in Pratapgarh. So we go to Pratapgarh, and you look at the building. You looked at the meditation hall, and the roof was on an angle. Then not the side wall was on an angle. We said, "You can't sit in here. This thing could fall down." So we
mhm.
had to get a tent to put there.
Hmm.
They had all these. He built all these little like cells and stuff, but you really couldn't use them, and they were in bed. So, and he built it in a hollow. So up on the road, um, you could just stand on the road and look into where you were meditating. Now, Pratapgarh was this out of the way village. They had never seen Westerners much before.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, 150 Westerners descended upon this place.
Goodness.
So they were like, couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So then, what happened was the cooks quit the first day. So all we had was this one cook who we knew from Benares. He was the cook at the Burmese Vihar in Benares.
Hmm.
So all of the Westerners together, there were about 12 or 13 of us, we became his apprentices. We
Hmm.
made chapatis. We cooked the rice. We cooked the vegetables. This was the first time that meditators actually did everything.
Hmm.
And Goenka, and so the course went on like that. And it was just a little, I caught one guy. I was sort of in charge of doing the kitchen stuff with the assistant. I did rice, for 200,
Hmm.
and there were tents all over the place. And I went to find somebody once in a cell, and it was a French French guy, and he was shooting morphine.
Oh,
So obviously he had to leave. But
yeah.
I mean, this is the craziness that went on in some of these early courses.
Yeah. Yeah. And Goenka's managing this all by himself. That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And we had just with our assistants,
Yeah.
as managers and stuff. But all by himself. There was no other teachers or anything of that nature. He did everything.
Hmm. I'm also curious about the discourses, just because this is such a hallmark of a Goenka 10-day course, at least. And I'm almost thinking of like how you hear about comedians, well, go to these like smaller clubs and just try all these different routines. And then when they got it all figured out, then they'll do the HBO special or whatever. And we have these fully formulated discourses that I think are from 1990 or 1991 that are the standard today. But I would have a feeling that like during those years that you're describing, it's almost like his not only is he experimenting with courses, but he's also experimenting with discourses and jokes and rhythms and all of those things. So did you get a feel for like how he was trying different things and discourses in different courses?
He did. He changed a couple of things here and there, and he would ask us if this was right. Is this the right wording? Is this the right phraseology? Is this? He used to. One thing that always sticks in my mind. He changed. It used to be, hippies. The word. He did this whole thing about freaks. Now
Yeah.
it used to not be freaks. It
Uh-huh.
was hippies.
Uh-huh.
But then the hippies sort of passed away, and the freaks came, so he changed it.
Mhm.
But he used to have a line about how these hippies came, on this. And the discourses, they've changed somewhat, but in overall, they're not really that far away from what he used to did. He just kept
Mm.
fine tuning it and
Mhm.
getting better and better with it.
Mhm.
He was scared in the beginning. He didn't feel his English was good enough to it.
Right.
So
I've
he went
heard that.
slowly, but they're pretty much it's pretty they're they're not really very different.
Hmm. Interesting.
Little stories, little this or that, adding here or there, but not really much different.
Mhm.
Supposedly, this with the Indian stuff is that his Hindi is very, very good and very classical,
Mhm.
and the discourses in Hindi are different than the English discourses
Mhm.
because they're more aligned with that culture.
Mm. Right. So as we're still in this phase of before it's gotten out of India and it's now becoming a very known thing on this hippie counterculture circuit that everyone is in this kind of open and connected environment you describe. People are gravitating towards it, trying it along with the other things they're trying of trekking and drugs and other teachers and things like that. But then how does it if we're at this point, what else can you say about this period that we're in, and then where does it start to move towards whatever the next phase is?
Greatest period of my life. It was great, I mean, it was wonderful. It was like sort of, your teenage years,
How so?
everything everything was sort of fun and great, and we just kept trying. I mean, it just kept evolving. I'll get it changes. I guess the big changes sort of happened later on in like 1974 and on, when a lot of us left India and went back to the States,
Hmm.
and also Goenka got Damagiri. A big change also happened when a couple of people invited Mr. Hover to come to India.
Hmm.
And in 1973, he came and started teaching courses. And at that point, he went to Burma with some people and came back. And he got very strict. And all of a sudden, there was silence on courses and other rules. And Goenkaji got stricter after Hover came.
Hmm.
And that was a turning point in things. And then when Hover went back to the States and we all came back, a lot of people did courses with him also.
So you describe this as the most beautiful or precious time of your life. Can you put some more imagery to that to take listeners into what it
Well,
felt like to be involved in something so special?
oh, well, so I went up to, it was just very free. After doing all these courses, I I had to leave India for visa problems and went to Nepal, and then I came back to India, and I worked my way back up to Dalhousie. So in Dalhousie at that time, I met up with my old girlfriend there, who was there with Vimla Taka, who was an Indian teacher at the time. Most people probably haven't heard of her, but if Krishnamurti had a chief disciple, she was it.
Hmm.
And she was also involved in the land gift movement there. So I got to spend a lot of time with her, and she used to give talks at night. And a lot of us who were students of Goenkaji would come and listen to her and stuff. And also, so it was just like so personal and stuff. And the biggest thing I'd say is, if I wasn't such an arrogant idiot at the time, I would have got a lot more out of it.
What do you mean?
Well, after you meditate for a year or two, you think you know everything. you know. So
Yeah,
I was a little bit too,
that's true.
to really gain. I could have gained a lot more from being with her. That's what I say. But they had no. Um, she was of the Krishnamurti, no groups, none of this. She used to
Yeah.
live in Mount Abu, but she was a very, very special person.
How so?
Um, just her whole presence, and she was politically active and then became more into meditative. I don't know if people know about it was the land gift movement with
Hmm.
Vinoba Bhave.
Hmm.
That he was sort of like a contemporary of Gandhi. He walked around India on this group of people, and they would get people to give land to him, and then he would redistribute it to poorer people.
Hmm.
So she was involved in that, and then she was involved with Christian. She just had a view of she was just an unbelievable. I think her books are still out, but she wanted you to meditate, do yoga, and this, but she didn't have a technique, and she didn't have a this. She said you need to find ways that are good for you.
Hmm.
So it was sort of the same way Krishnamurti was.
Yeah. Right.
So she was so that was and Joseph in okay, up in Dalhousie at that time, we all rented houses and lived in houses. Joseph was up there, Sharon, myself, Barry, Lapping, a bunch of people. We all had these places, and we all spent sort of you know, the hot season up there.
Hmm.
And then Goenkaji came up to teach a course, and everybody would go and do the course. And then
Hmm.
after that, people would start going down to the plains, or go someplace else. Wait when it got cooler, and so, it
Hmm.
was and he taught like only one course that year, and then he left. And then I had a choice of what to do after he left, and I had all these different choices to do. I said, well, should I go to Mount Abu? Should I go? He was taking a course in Darjeeling, and I said, oh, maybe I should go back to Bodh Gaya. So
Hmm.
I decided to go back to Bodh Gaya at that time, and I was stayed at the Gandhi Ashram there. It's August in Bodh Gaya, which is not exactly what you would call seasonal, the big season for it.
Hmm.
And so I lived at the Gandhi ashram there next door to Manindra. And I was there for months. And I studied Abhidhamma with Manindra. And we used to talk every day about things. And I would do self courses. And I'd walk to the temple at night. And there was hardly anybody there. One or two Westerners would show up. So it
Hmm.
was just a great time of my life there too. I just had so many opportunities. I feel very grateful for being able to have all these opportunities. So,
And tell us a bit about Munindra.
if Goenka was your father, Manindra was your mother. He was nice. He was quiet and nice. Manindra was fantastic. He was he was very close to Goenka. The two of them were very close to each other. When Goenkaji came, Manindra would go over there, sit with them. They would always talk. Manindra taught like if you wanted to study with Manindra at the time, you would go sit. He'd tell you what to do, and you do it. And, we'd come by and talk to you and do things like that. But he was very scholarly also, and very, very quiet. He was all dressed in his whites. He was anagarika, which is a monk for all this, and
Mhm.
he was just the kindest, nicest, but funny in a different ways. There was this, he used to, if you went to the bazaar with him, he would argue, or as he would say, bargain with the bazaar people,
Mhm.
back and forth for a paisa and this, and go back and, the guy wanted, and it was like over nickels,
Mhm.
and us
Mhm.
Westerners, we couldn't really believe it. Meninja would say to him, he says, life is to be lived simple, not to be a simpleton. You know,
Yeah.
and he says, so he would bargain all the time with people. It was quite funny, but it was him. It wasn't like putting on airs.
Mm.
And I mean, you would love shopping with him because it was always quite an experience. And the other thing is, so I used to be sitting in the morning, and Manindra was like a door or so away from me, so you could hear everything.
Mhm.
And I had limited knowledge of Hindi. Like I knew what milkmaid and word was dude, and I could know what the word for water was pani. So the milk guy would come and bring milk from a ninja in this
Mhm.
big container every day, and then he would pour it out. As he would come, Meninja would argue with him. Meninja had what do you call it, hydrometer or something. He had a testing kit so he could
Mhm.
test the amount of water in the milk. So he would argue with him for like on and on, and I'm be sitting there and I'm saying, "Will you stop already?" And he would be arguing back and forth like half, other pani, other dude, no, back and forth, back and forth. It was, and so he was very real in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and but very simple. He was not the powerful figure Goenkaji was in a sense,
Hmm.
but very kind, sweet, and I would read. He gave me Abhidhamma books. I would read them, and then every day I would go over there, and I would ask him questions, and he would explain things to me about what this means and what this means and that, which was, at the time was, quite, I sort of developed a knowledge which later on we can get into. I sort of gave up, but and
Mhm.
also I could go over to the temple every night, sit under the tree or sit in the temple, and the ashram that we lived in, the Gandhi ashram, was an ashram from Vinoba's time. It was a land grant ashram, and they would train Bihar, where Bodh Gaya is the poorest state in India, and they would go out and they would teach the women sort of nursing things, and they would teach the boys how to fix pumps and stuff. So they had schools out there. In fact, Goenka taught the first children's course at one of these schools.
Mhm.
He was very close to the person who ran the place, which was Dwarko, who was you know you would call a social justice person for sure, as he
Mhm.
was. He was a really great sort of leader for social justice and trying to get people involved in stuff. So So it was all a combination of things.
Right. So as you're painting a picture, transitioning from just kind of arriving in India, the whole experience, overwhelming of what the country represents, and the people that are coming from this countercultural movement, and then starting to experiment with Goenka, and you're now describing transitioning into this phase of those people in the community, some of the names that you mentioned, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, and Barry Lapping, among others, certainly that are not just taking a course here or there, or having, as Goenka says on the discourse, the Goenka trip, but are actually starting to settle a bit. I mean, not permanently, obviously, they're in India, but starting to just kind of go through the rhythms of living ongoing in India, knowing where to go with the different climatic systems and the different course offerings and stuff like that. And so as this movement is kind of transitioning from being something more transient and adventurous and kind of wandering around to something where people, at least a little bit more, starting to plan their lives around in terms of where they go and what they're studying, what they're doing, what shifts started to happen with what was happening within the community, within the students, and within the teachings and courses.
They were just people who decided this is really, this is for me. This is I really need, this, and you realize that you wanted to continue this, you either now or for your whole life, you know, and so you started, your whole life started revolving around courses and going places where you could meditate and just changing the way your whole life is at that time. And that happened a year or two into things, after you saw other things and you decided, yeah, this is really what I want to do. And a lot of us just stuck together and knew what, you knew what was doing, and you just kept, and it was a similar group of people, who were around, and many of us just went from one course to another, and it just happened sort of organically. Wasn't like you said anything different. You know,
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting then projecting many years in the future among this tight knit and open group that you describe. Some of them go on to be important figures within the Goenka movement in terms of what they do and being teachers and how they carry the teachings back. Some of them become very important and famous teachers outside of the Goenka movement, like Joseph or Sharon or others. Others probably you have no record of and just disappeared into the other. So it just the at that time you're all together and all practicing in this eager and close ways, but then the trajectories differs over time as the
well,
movement starts to spread.
we've stayed friends.
Hmm.
Joseph, we have at least once a year. Joseph and I have lunch together, and Barry, and plus she's Sharon, and we stayed friends over the years. It's not. It's just maybe we had just slightly different views of things. I don't look at things as separate as other people look at it. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, everybody should do what they feel the best with. Nothing is better or worse than the other thing. If you want to practice in a certain way, then you should practice there. But you should practice there. But there's no condemning or anything. There's no one particular technique that does everything for everybody. You
Hmm.
know, it just doesn't work that way. You know, there is the thing that you have to follow the actual teachings of the Buddha.
Hmm.
But as far as one particular technique, there are other techniques. Obviously, in Burma, there's hundreds of them.
Hmm.
Here, it's the same thing. If you're comfortable with it, and this is something that's for you, then you should do it. But you don't have to say anything bad about the other ones.
Hmm.
Or if you've done one and then you leave, you don't have to say bad things. You left because it didn't work for you. That doesn't mean the technique or the group or the community is bad. You know,
Right.
that's the part that sort of gets me here.
Right, right. It does make me think, though, that in at least the modern take-home message of that you find among many in the Goenka organization today is that this is the only technique. It is the pure and pristine technique, and the only one that goes back to what the Buddha actually taught. And this does create a certain kind of narrowing and insular and
Maybe people who think that way are a little
oh,
confused. You
right,
know,
right.
I don't. Let's put it this way. I don't figure. I don't. I mean, I only practice this technique. I do it. I've been very close to Goenka over the years. I do long courses. I was an assistant teacher. I no longer am. I don't feel, I feel yes, this is a technique that can take me to as far as I can go, but I don't feel anything that it's the one and only. I think that gets I think it somewhat gets confused,
Hmm.
and I think some of the ways things got passed on make some people think that way. I always was like, the only reason I would say is when you don't have confidence in what you're doing, you either put down other things or say that this is the best. Because if you didn't think this was the best, you wouldn't do it. You would do something else.
Sure. Of course, yeah. Yeah, well, that's my question then is that, if, looking back at how the teachings and the technique were held at that time versus what we're seeing today, and you kind of already answered that or alluded to an answer that there was some that that comes from something in the way that this started to get passed down. So let's go there. Where did you start to see those changes and how, and how it did become passed down in a way that perhaps led to some of the sentiments that some people hold today?
Well, it's sort of hard to, I think people just, there's so many issues involved in it, with that. I don't find that certain, I mean, it's more, how do we, how do you say it without becoming part of it,
Mhm.
you know, how do you say this without criticizing,
Mhm.
I just feel that people should just, be, um, open and fine and be confident in what they're doing and continue to do what they do. And
Mhm.
yes, Goenkaji also, you have to realize his background was somewhat different. It
Mhm.
wasn't he wasn't born a Buddhist. He was born a staunch Hindu. So
Mhm.
some of his conditioning is somewhat different. And also there's somewhat of the game of telephone. You say something, and by the time it gets to the fifth people, it's completely confusing. And Goenka
Yeah.
might have said something, and somebody took it one way and said this and said that, and things have changed quite a bit. Um, I don't know. Goenka and Indra are very close. There was no animosity between them. I think it's more students and other people who have animosity towards other people, and I don't see anything being gained by it. Okay?
Right. Well, those are two really important points. I mean, one, looking at the particular conditioning of the teacher, which led to frame things in certain ways, and everyone has their own conditioning, so it's going to come out in some way. And the second is this game of telephone. So if we could just look at both of those for a moment, and in what ways did you see the particular conditioning of Goenka starting to frame and how he was teaching or looking at?
Nothing. I mean, it's just some of the strictness on Sheila really goes back to his Hindu roots. He's very strong on that part of things, and
Mhm.
that and just other. It's hard to pinpoint exact types of things, but he was very. There's a great deal of purity in it. In what he tries to do. He's trying to keep things pure in his mind,
Mhm.
and sometimes maybe he was a little stricter than was necessary. I don't know. I
Mm.
mean,
How,
that's
how do you think he defined purity? What do you think pure meant for him?
well, he didn't want you to mix techniques. From
Mhm.
his point of view, if you if you did a technique, you should do that technique.
Mhm.
You have a chance to work to do it. Don't mix. Don't go from one place to another. You know, nobody's just keep practicing until you have achieved the goal. In this technique, if you don't feel that this technique is working for you, well, then leave the technique and go someplace else. That's fine.
Mhm.
But you want to maintain the purity of a technique, because even though techniques might not be conflicting, certain things of techniques can conflict with each other. If you tell somebody to do something a certain way in certain techniques, it's conflicting with the way somebody's teaching in another technique.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's what he wanted. He knew that this technique worked for him, and he wanted to keep that type of purity with it. Okay. um, And I think some ways he gets misunderstood by that.
Yeah, and that leads to the second part where there's this game of telephone, and you just said sometimes he gets misunderstood. So,
Yeah.
in what ways did the game of telephone lead to a misunderstanding of his intended message?
I mean, I just hear people say things which I can't believe.
Like what, for example?
I can't even remember. But I mean, I was able to I was able to spend quite a bit of time with Goenkaji alone and with, and this, and talk with him
Hmm.
directly. And I hear him, and I go by that. I hear other people telling me things. They said, oh, Goenkaji said this. And it was just completely contradictory. I can't really think of things right offhand,
Hmm.
but, it's not always, not always, it's not always been passed down without, and I'm sure it's the same way from the Buddha.
Uh-huh.
Right? Do you think that everything that people have said in Buddhism from 2,500 years ago is passed down in purity? I don't think so.
Hmm. And so that leaves an interesting question of what do you do when you have a spiritual teacher, whether it's Goenka or Upakin or the Buddha, and you start to have generations removed from that. And this is an age-old question that goes far beyond Buddhism of to what degree do you figure out how strict and quote unquote pure you have to be in trying to adhere to exactly what was said by that particular person in their time and place, and to what degree can you take as what they said to inspiration to then mold it and frame it to the current time and place that you're living.
Well, there's the basics of things which you need to keep, and then there's all the other stuff. I mean, it's hard to answer, but I mean, okay, the basics of Shila, Samadhi, Panya, you have to keep that part. There's all this other stuff that might be institutionalized. There's the practice and there's an institutionalizing of it. Okay.
Hmm.
I say the practice you have to keep pure. The institutionalizing of it, not so much.
Hmm.
And everybody has to figure it out themselves in a sense. I mean, you can't tell people, different things.
Hmm. So going back to where we left off in this trajectory, you were describing this circle of Westerners in India who are becoming more serious, kind of planning their lives around this, starting to have this inkling of an idea, as you mentioned, of, this is really good. Maybe I should do more than one course and do it for an extended period of time. Maybe I should do it for life. And so this kernel of idea is starting to take place. What happens after that?
Oh, a lot of us did it,
Hmm.
and kept doing it and kept doing it. And and then what you see now in America is a lot of us who did do that and came back from it, and did help each other, establish the techniques here in in America and in the world. You I'll tell you one. Okay, so this. All right, I'm a little hesitant to talk about. I will though. Okay, is years ago, in 1974, Goenkaji did a self course in Bodh Gaya, which he did all the time, and a group of us, and he let people sit with him in the self course. And after the self course, we went to the temple the last night of the self course, and we'd sit at the temple. And we all sat at the temple. And then before this, he told, I don't remember, maybe it was 15 of us, that after everybody leaves, you people should stay. We're going to stay the whole night. Okay. So there's 15 of us. We're staying the whole night with Goenkaji sitting at the temple. We go from the tree to the other rooms to other different places in the temple. And at the end, maybe it's the middle, I don't really remember. He says, we're going to do a vow if you would want to. And the vow would be to serve him and the Dhamma for the rest of your life. So 15, these people all took the vows. And how I can recollect, there's only two of us who have kept them since then. And that was 50 years ago.
Hmm.
And and there were other people who were there um, who went in different directions. But that sort of goes in line with this. And the two of them were myself and Barry.
And what does that mean to you that it was only two that kept
Nothing.
the
It
vow?
means that these two people decided, it's just how life is.
Hmm.
Some people decide and they stick to something and other people don't.
Hmm.
There's nothing, but I felt for myself, I basically am I guess I have a lot of loyalty. I guess I made a commitment, and I don't see any reason not to keep it.
Right, right, right.
You know,
Yeah.
and I tried to keep it through my whole life. And that vow was 50 years ago.
Wow, that's beautiful. I mean, that's not unlike a marriage vow and just a different type of
Right.
relationship.
It actually worked better than the marriage.
Right, right. Wow, that's really something. So so how did it start to take off? How as
We came back to him. I think really when things started taking off, we had left India and come back to America. So Joseph left first. He had enough of India. After a while, India puts a real taxing on your body.
Mhm.
The food is not high in nutrients, to say the least, and so everybody sort of got tired of it, and all decided it was time to come back. Some of us had been on and off there from 71 to 74, or even before that. So it was a long time. So I guess in the spring of 1974, we started coming back. I flew back with Sharon, and Joseph was back before this, and we all sort of came back together. Barry came back. A lot of us just different ways. We all came back to there, and Mr. Hover was starting to teach a little bit then, so we did courses with Mr. Hover, and we were sort of lost, not knowing what to do.
Hmm.
And Joseph bumped into Ramdas in California,
Mhm.
and they asked him, Joseph, and Ramdas asked Joseph. He was teaching at Naropa at this course that Ramdas was teaching, and he asked Joseph if he would teach a meditation segment of it, and Joseph said yes. So he went out in Boulder that summer. I was hitchhiking. I was going to go to Boston. Guy picked me up, said he was going to Cincinnati. So I said, "Oh, that's fine." And I went to Boulder, and I lived with Joseph. And then I stopped and saw Jackie Schwartz too on the way. And then Sharon decided to come out to Boulder. And Joseph was a huge hit in Boulder. People
Mhm.
loved him. He was by far the biggest, out of all of the things that Ram Dass did, he was by far um, the biggest draw there of, people in that seminar.
What do you think resonated so much about what he did?
He was great. He could explain Dharma, and it was simple. And not many people at that point had heard of Theravada Dharma, which in my mind was simpler and more straightforward than the Hindu things that Ram Dass would talk about, and the Tibetan Buddhist things of Trungpa. So many people picked up on that. At the same time, Jack came. Jack was teaching out there. That was the first time Joseph and Jack met.
Jack Cornfield.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but he had a little course on Theravada Buddhism. No. And so I was living in Joseph's apartment with him for the first week, yeah, and hanging out there. And at that also the same time, so Joseph got a big following there. And at the same point, um, this other friend of ours, Wes Nisker, set up a course for Joseph to teach, a 30-day course in in the Sequoia National Forest in October or September. I think it was September. So a lot of those people decided that they wanted to do the course. So all of a sudden, Joseph had a course, and we all went out there with him. And it was a 30-day course, and it was really the first course. And Sharon taught with him. And it was the first real course that was Joseph did. And at that same point, Mr. Hover was teaching courses. So all of a sudden, in America, there was Joseph teaching courses and Mr. Hover teaching courses, and all of a sudden, people were wanting to do these things.
We should also remind here, though, that because I think there's a way to hear this that, Joseph Goldstein was teaching courses, Robert Hover was teaching courses, and in 2023, there's a way to think about this in terms of how we think of meditation courses today. But just to go back to the point that you made at the start of our conversation, where the idea of a intensive meditation silent retreat, while Goenka didn't start that, obviously, Uba Khin was doing it, and there's probably you can find some precedent for it. What he did in formulating what the 10-day course was, it standardized and opened up possibilities. And so it probably wouldn't be incorrect to say that these courses, these experiments, you could even say, because they're also formulating what they're doing, that Hover and Goldstein and some of the others are putting together, that's still drawing so much from the format that Goenka laid down before them. Would that be fair to say?
Oh yeah, yeah. Hubbard sort of learned all of the things from Goenkaji, and Joseph did all these courses with Goenkaji. I
Hmm.
mean, at some point, Joseph, he studied a lot with Goenkaji and with Meninja. Meninja um, pushed him to do courses with Goenkaji.
Hmm.
Meninja was Joseph's main teacher,
Right.
but Joseph sort of got a lot of the things, and a lot of the courses that Joseph taught in the beginning, a lot of them were filled with people from Goenkaji, who had sat with Goenkaji. Because where are you going to get people anyway?
Hmm. And how did Goenka take that? That a lot of his students were now going to learn from Joseph Goldstein.
He wasn't, he wasn't 100% behind it, but he
Hmm.
didn't, I mean, in his ways at that point, he didn't really feel a lot of us were ready to teach.
Hmm.
But he also knew that Joseph was not his student per se,
Hmm.
but he wasn't negative to him. But
Right.
I
Right.
mean, so, but then Joseph taught more courses as time went on, and I managed most of Joseph's first courses and helped set him up. People would set him up, and I would come in and do all the sort of work that was necessary to get done. You know, doing the cooking, managing it, and stuff. And then, so I was very involved with Joseph and Sharon at that time.
Right. How did those go?
Went great, good time. It went. It was remarkable. It took off. And we also had a little Dhamma house in Santa Cruz called the Dhamma Vihara at the time. A friend of Joseph lent it to us, and we had self courses and other stuff there. And so I was in California at the time, and then uh, they flew me out to Great Barrington to run the first course Joseph and Jack did together there. So I was pretty much involved, and I also managed some courses for Mr. Hover at the time. So I was sort of in the first level of like doing a lot of this stuff.
And this is before Goenka had brought his courses to America.
Well, Hover was Goenka at that point.
I see. So Hover was acting
Hover
as a
was a student.
proxy. Mhm.
Hover was a student of Ubakin also,
Right.
and at that point, he was teaching. And Goenkaji said, "Listen to Mr. Hover in America." Now you
Hmm.
couldn't find two more opposite people if you tried.
How so? How was Robert Hover?
Hover was like really strong, uptight, like engineer type of guy, and Goenkaji was like, pretty loose in a lot of ways, and smiling and happy and powerful, and just much different.
I heard one Hover student explain to me that for every time that Goenka references anicca or impermanence, that Hover instead references dukkha or suffering.
No, he did it. He did that. He also used to do a Nietzsche all the time. Anicca. But he was like an army drill sergeant. Yeah, he was just a different person. It was just he was very strict. He was actually very helpful in a lot of ways because, Goenkaji was not very strict in the beginning. Hover was very strict
Mm.
about sitting and silence and all of his courses. He at one point put timers on. You know, uh, all of you want to sit. An odd time for an hour. There'll be a buzzer. There'll be a buzzer in an hour and a half. There'll be a buzzer at 2 hours. There'll be a buzzer at two and a half, and a buzzer at three.
Hmm.
I'm saying to myself, "You're crazy." I'll take the buzzer at one. That'll be the end.
So it was 3 hour aditans.
Yeah, I mean, ridiculous. But, I
Yeah,
don't know. I think he was the only one left in there by then. You know.
I did the same Hover student I'm thinking of that I spoke to. He told me that as a new student, he was making himself sit those 3 hours, and he was coming out successful, but had absolutely zero Dhamma understanding. Was
Right.
just stealing himself to be able to manage those 3 hours.
Yeah, yeah. But Hubbard, all of these people, Hubbard and Coleman and Dennison were sort of around for a while. There was a period. I mean, there were all these little periods of time,
Hmm.
that people were involved and then not.
And involved in being a part of Goenka's emerging
Yeah,
mission, or kind of
yeah,
their own
yeah,
take on it.
yeah. Involved with Goenkaji's, thing, and then
Mm.
sort of left or did this or did that. Same with, Sayama.
So I wonder if one of the reasons that some of these Western teachers were more involved at the time was that Goenka simply wasn't wasn't in the West, and was still trying to devise how this movement would take shape going forward, and thought perhaps that he would be more on the Asian Indian side of things and these Western teachers would take their countries.
That was some of it, but a big part of it was they were students of Ubakin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They were not somebody he appointed.
Yeah.
He had such great faith in Ubakin. If Ubakin said it was all right, it was all right.
So then how does this teaching start to take off as different teachers are experimenting with different formats related to Goenka more or less, but students of Ubaken? How does it move from that point?
Well, they were. I mean, then they would. Hubbard was going all over the world too.
Mhm,
Hubbard went to Europe. Hubbard went to Australia. So a lot of that was coming. And then at that particular time, um, Goenkaji in 75 or so they were starting Damagiri. So Goenkaji was staying in India. His main function was to try to get this meditation center built and off the
mhm,
ground.
mhm,
So he was there, and you would come and sit at Damagiri. So and then people would go back. So there was sort of places that they could go when they got back, and do a course with Mr. Hubbard or Coleman or somebody. So that period was sort of like that. And it was there wasn't like some exploding moment. It was incremental in a sense.
mhm. Right, and this is also being done in at the same time that you have other concurrent teachings happening, like Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon
Yeah.
Salzberg. We haven't yet talked about, I don't know how much this intersects your own story, but we haven't yet talked about other traditions entirely, like the
Well,
Mahasi or U Pandita or Ajahn Chah.
I was one of the people who helped start Barry. Okay, I was on the first board, but I mean that was at its particular time in '76. But. So let me before that I was very so I was doing a lot of courses for Joseph, Mr. Hubbard, Jack, so I managed a lot of courses, and it was fine then at that point. And then I was with my wife, who was also a student of Goenkaji at the time, and we decided to drive to Massachusetts because she'd never been on the East Coast. So we drove out to visit friends of ours, Eric Lerner, and we wound up in
Oh,
Conway.
Eric Lerner, he wrote the book about
Oh yeah.
meditating. Mhm,
So Eric was living at what they used to call a Nietzsche farm,
mhm.
where we wound up living, and that's where and Stephen Schwartz's other people. So um, we wound up moving out to Western Mass, and we bought a house, and we were living there, and um, Eric was there, and we then way before this was Sharon and I were once talking. He said, it's really terrible for us to keep moving around. Why don't we get a place and we can be in one place, and people could come to us and not have to move around?
Mhm.
And that was one of the ways we thought about Barry. And Barry was sort of designed in the very beginning mentally to be like the Burmese Vihara, where a place where teachers could come and go, come and go. It was never meant to be anybody's center. It was a center for all different traditions.
Right.
So when we were out there for a while, so then Eric and Richard Cohn, they were looking for a place. They found IMS in, and we were able to put it together. And the first board was Eric, myself, Lila, my wife, Richard Cohn, and Stephen Schwartz.
Mhm.
And it was, and we had Joseph taught courses there. Jack did, and Mr. Hubbard actually was one of the biggest draws there.
Hmm.
Why? Because there were Goenkaji students there were much more Goenkaji students than any other students.
When this was before there was a Goenka Center.
Yes, Goenkaji
Right.
Center was in 1982,
Mhm, and what year are we talking about here?
1976.
Okay, so this is some years before.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, we started at that same time. Lila got pregnant. I had wound up with a kid. I didn't see eye to eye exactly how things were going at Barry, so I no longer was on the board, but I still was friends with these people, and I sat there a couple of times, but but I was I was one of the original people who helped, figure out a lot of it and also helped start it.
And so were you also involved with the visits to America by Ajahn Chah and Mahasi Sayadaw?
I saw Ajahn Chah. I wasn't involved in that
Mhm,
particular thing, but Ajahn Chah came and stayed in Conway when we were out there,
mhm.
um, at, outside the little cabin we had. So I got to see them. I got to meet him and hang around with him for a while. I guess that was like 1979 or so.
Mhm.
I wasn't that. I mean, by that time, I was already on my second child. So from 76 to 79, I was not that much involved in stuff.
Mhm.
I would sit. I would just be hopeful to get a sit in. Not many people at that time had kids,
I see.
so I wasn't that involved. But in that particular time,
So you were taking a bit of a backseat to Dhamma during that period as you
no,
as
I
you
was
had
doing.
family.
I was doing my householder life.
That's what I mean, yeah, the household life
That
became
didn't last
predominant.
long. I got back into it pretty quick again. So for a couple of years, I did that, and back, and then eventually, Hubbard was not able to teach, so Joseph and Jack and that all that group, they sort of took over the whole sort of thing in a sense.
Why was Hover not able to teach?
Well, he did things that we don't need. He was no longer sort of. There were some issues. Let's put it that way. I
Some
don't know,
ethical violations, we could say.
ethical things that he no
Yeah.
longer. So Goenka, he was no longer with once he was not. Once he was out of Goenkaji's orbit, there was no demand for him.
Mhm.
So because most of the people were Goenkaji students or whatever, so there's very little demand there, and then eventually he stopped teaching.
Right, right.
And I liked Hubbard. He was a nice enough guy and stuff, and so that 1976. Barry started. Hubbard taught courses. They taught courses, and I was sort of yeah, I had just slightly different views. Let's put it that way. Well, some of them financially, and others, But it's a great place, wonderful. It's done a. I don't agree with it, but it's so many people got whatever they could get out of things. Dhamma, So it worked out well. Like Joseph invited me back for the 40th anniversary thing, so I came,
Mm,
visited. But it just at that point, I had so many things in my life going on. I mean, you know, wife, two kids, family. I wasn't that involved anyway,
mhm.
so it naturally came. And I'd been in contact with Goenkaji, and he said just let it organically happen, and it organically happened, and I was no longer involved. So
Right, right. And I guess that was also a period where I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this before because you have these different Dhamma initiatives taking off in America, some of them indirectly related to Goenkaji, some directly related, but he's actually not here yet doing anything.
1979, he came to Montreal,
Mhm.
and so a lot of people went up. And he taught in England and in France. And then in 1980, he taught in California and in 1981, he taught in Massachusetts. It was a course right by here in Goshen. And that was the first course that went outside of courses at the center that was um, done only on Donna.
So that was kind of a new way to experiment.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's another person who was involved in a lot of things. When I told him about it, he said, "It's America. If you give something for free, people don't think it's worth anything."
Mm,
We proved him wrong.
mm,
So that was, and it was important to try to make sure that this course worked, because if this course didn't work, then nothing,
yeah,
then it wasn't going to happen. So
yeah.
we had a course in Goshen. I think there were close to 200 people. And at that time, Goenkaji had cancellation and stuff. So he came and stayed with us for about a week afterwards. And we went looking for centers.
Oh, that soon.
Oh, yeah.
So right after the course that
Yeah.
you knew it.
Yeah. Well, he wanted to have centers here and stuff. And uh, we found something. The deal fell through, and the next year he came again. And we went looking again, and then we found the center in 1982.
That's funny because before hearing the story and hearing your involvement in all of this, when I first became interested in meditation and Buddhism in the West quite some time ago, I remember kind of being a bit surprised that two of the most important meditation centers in the country were just both happened to be in Western Mass, not very far from each other. And I was
That's
just
because we
always
were living here.
right. I mean, you're the missing connection there. I thought, what a bit of serendipity. How can I used to laugh and think like, oh, I wonder if they like play, frisbee or something on the weekends, one
There
center against the other or
were
something.
other people who started Barry also, who I was living with, Stephen and Eric. We all
Mm,
lived here first. And actually, it's funny, one of the first courses Mr. Hubbard taught was also in Western Mass.
mhm, mm.
Yeah. So,
Well, and one of the other early locations, which as I started to get more involved in the Goenka tradition, when I saw this, I nearly knocked my socks off, is I my I don't exactly have one hometown, but if
yeah,
there's one place that is truly my hometown in my heart where I did spend most of my formative years, it's a very small town in Northern California that doesn't even have a stoplight called Occidental.
yeah,
And
I was there.
I was when I was in rural countryside Japan, flipping through a book and reading the different courses that Goenka had done, and when I saw Occidental California, I was just speechless because
Yeah.
I mean, that's even
There was
people in
a
San
center.
Francisco don't know where Occidental is.
There was a small center there for a while.
So tell me about that. This is a story
I
close to
don't.
my heart.
I just remember it a little. I went to visit Norm there, but there was a little center there. But you know, the I don't really. I was more. I'm more involved here than there. So
Yeah, yeah,
I don't want. I don't like to say things that I don't know.
sure.
You know, I can make up a great story if you want.
Yeah, no, I love, I'm far from Occidental now in terms of, time and distance, but it's still always in my heart.
Yeah, but no, Shelburne Falls, Barry. I mean, really.
Mm,
Not exactly booming metropolitan areas.
right, yeah, and becoming a hub of this Buddhist activity that's taking place, and that's largely because you settled there.
Well, there were other people here, and we all came.
Sure.
There were just a group of us, and just stayed here and stuff. So,
Yeah,
but,
right, and so that course he did in Western Mass, that first course, that was really the impetus to seeing that this could really be something that you can find that you can call your own.
well, he was always looking to start a center, and he felt, that it could work here. Because we went around and looked things. He had confidence, that we could put it together. Um, I also, I also kind of persuaded him on different levels, as
Mm,
much as I could. You know,
persuaded him in terms of location?
Yeah, yes. This is a great location, close to New York, close to Boston, not far from
Mm,
Montreal. Land's not expensive. Da da da. So we
right,
found we went around looking at a lot of places. You know,
and this was also before the famous split with Mother Sayama at
no,
IMC in
no,
1982.
the split. This was right afterwards.
Oh, this was after. So how did that impact the way that he was looking at
That's
this?
why That's when I think that he wanted to do something. He was done. He was going to do everything on his own now. So
Mhm, and how did that? Because you knew him so much before that split when he was really still part of that mission, and then obviously everything he did after. What impact did that split have on him, personally, emotionally, and then as a teacher with a mission?
he just took off. I mean, personally, emotionally, I couldn't answer. I never showed. It never affected him. You know,
Mhm,
I mean, I had some conversations which were personal between it, which I'm not going to talk about, whatever. But he was not. Let's put it this way: he was the same Goenkaji afterwards. But I think he felt somewhat that he could now just do what he felt was he wanted to do in the way he
mhm,
wanted to do it.
so it freed him in a way.
It freed him in a way to do it, and part of the thing of not charging was a big part of it.
And how about as Goenkaji was starting his mission and IMS was also in its early years, and Jack and Sharon and Joseph were also beginning their teaching and Goenka's coming to America? What is, and probably other traditions and teachers I'm leaving off as well that were getting off the ground then as well. This is all kind of the start of, I don't want to say American Buddhism because you had many touches before that, but certainly uh, maybe American Buddhist meditation, or in a more structured and formulaic way, is really burgeoning at this time. What was the relations between these different traditions and teachers, and some of whom were teachers that were former students? What was the relation among them as this was all taking off from the ground?
I guess there was not much of a relationship. I mean, a lot of people say things back and forth, but there. I mean, when Goenkaji finally was here, Joseph and Sharon and other people came to visit him when he was at the center and stuff. Goenkaji never visited Barry. I don't know the exact. I don't think he wanted. Part of him is he doesn't want. Maybe he was concerned that they would use a visit of his there or whatever. I don't know the exact answer to that, but he didn't. They came to him. Also, he's a teacher. They were still students to him, even if they were teachers.
Mm-hmm.
But he never. He never. They came to visit him in Shelburne a couple of times. And I arranged for Sharon to meet him a couple of times when he was in New York.
Right. Yeah. And then as the Western mission really takes off and you start to, you do courses, as you say, these courses are high stakes. They have to work. If they don't work, then it's putting the whole mission of everything in jeopardy because
Well, you
you're
just have
giving
to
this.
change the charging, which he didn't want to do.
Right, right, right. And so these do work, so the mission can proceed. And now courses, now not just courses are taking place, but also centers are being established in US, in Europe, and Australia, just to start to get those things going. They're getting off the ground. In what ways, if any, really, do you see the mission starting to change? Because you talked about this kind of game of
Well, this is
telephone, about.
this is when the assistant teachers actually started.
So tell us about that change.
Well, all of a sudden, Goenkaji's not teaching a course, So, but people had to get used to things,
Hmm.
that everything was on, and we didn't have videos then. You had a cassette recorder playing it. So it was a little concerning. People were a little at first, but people started accepting it and started to see that it was working, and then it became acceptable. But it was pretty. There were a lot of old students of Goenkajis who weren't really that thrilled with it to begin with.
So yeah, I think this is an important moment, this development of the assistant teachers, because I'm reflecting on something you said about a half hour ago, where when we were talking about Joseph Goldstein starting to teach, and I asked Goenka's reaction, your response was, "Well, I don't think he really thought he was ready yet." And the thing that stood out was yet. And that kind of leads to a question: was in those early years, to as far as you know, do you think Goenkaji was looking ahead and preparing his students to take on teaching roles, teaching meaning a fuller sense of the word? Because, of course, what developed was that they went into assistant teaching roles where they would just merely play the recordings and the tapes that Goenka himself was saying, and to go through kind of formulaic question and answers with the students. And so that development that came, and you reference how some of the old students really were not pleased as that was happening because they were used to Goenka. Do you think that as Goenka himself was trying to figure out how to make this transition, was he looking at the idea of really having some of his students step up as teachers on their own footing as himself, or being able to be teachers in their own right, or what do you think made him, if he was thinking along those lines, what ultimately made him decide to not go that route and really just have placeholders that would bring his teachings?
I just put it that Goenkaji was trying, and he was going in the way he thought was best, and whatever he saw down the road this is the decisions he made. I really couldn't say, 100% what he was doing. He was trying, and all of a sudden, this thing turned out to work really well. You
Hmm.
know, and especially once they sort of got video with it, and other things, and it wasn't just a cassette recorder, and he saw how people were really benefiting. So I think that was pretty much when he saw how it would work. He might have changed his mind then. I don't know. If he was looking in the other direction to do it, but this was working. So he wasn't, he's a very smart person and a good businessman. If something's working, why change it publicly that much? And the other thing is, what I always think about is that if you can get me somebody who can give better discourses than him, I think he should go be a teacher. I mean, you have to say those 10-day discourses are pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're definitely the things that makes it stand out apart from everything else.
Right.
And as with any decision, there are by virtue of making a decision, you are prioritizing something to sacrifice something else. And
Yeah. I mean,
this,
the whole thing of being a teacher is sending metta. That was the whole part of teaching. And you
mm,
can send metta. You don't have to talk and give discourses.
right. Yeah. 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 So as this mission is starting to take off and teachers are being appointed, centers are being established, courses are being run, what stands out from this period? I guess we're looking around the 80s.
Well, it was kind of, who knew what was going to happen? It was like a new thing, and all of a sudden things started taking off, and other people were coming, and Goenka would come. He came a lot then. His thing was because VMC was sort of the first center. They'll argue, and Australia was at a similar time. Um, he came a lot and taught courses in America. I really, and taught courses at VMC quite a bit, and then he started expanding. It was, I mean, I didn't really know if this whole thing was going to work. I mean, you are not charging. You don't solicit funds. You're teaching courses by 10. I mean, it was a pretty interesting time in that sense. And also, and VMC started out as a small farmhouse on 8 acres of land. And you were here a while ago. You know
Yep.
what it developed into.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a resort.
Yeah, it's quite large. So I mean, it's sort of hard to look at things when you're involved in them.
I think that's really true.
I mean, I just would want to get by day to day. Let's make sure the next course works and the next and the next.
Mm. So when you look back at that period now, are there things that stand out or that you have perspective on that you were going through with the mission that weren't necessarily apparent at the time?
I don't know how it worked actually.
Something of a miracle.
Yeah, I mean, really, when you think about it, in using any metrics that you want, this should never have worked. You know,
Yeah.
um, but the other, and I just think that it stands out. And I think what is that really we did it in what I considered the right way, in a good way over 40 years. And we got great results from it. And people keep coming and they're very appreciative and everything is working really well. And, I couldn't be happier about that part.
Well, it's a
It's
yeah,
fantastic. It's a fantastic place to sit. I mean, I just sit, I usually sit like a couple long courses a year. So I just finished a 20-day course. I remember sitting in India, compared to what I have now, my own bathroom, my own room, a cell, I mean, I sat in a room with 11 people or 12 people, knee to knee, it's like night and day.
mm, yeah, that it must be really something to look at what the center has evolved into and, how many courses and centers there are around the world, how many students have actually gone to SID courses, how many teachers there are, what a big infrastructure this has become and how much protocol around it based on how you having been there in the earliest days of just how rough and experimental it all was to go from that into this. It must be really something to reflect on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, I've seen a lot of people come and go. Let's put it that way. There
Yeah.
aren't that many people still around.
Mm.
So,
So are there things about your institutional memory of just knowing where it came from and how it got from there to here and then seeing and those people who come in, and you really have a game of telephone now because it's separated by years, and in
Yeah.
terms it's a time you can't go back to. Are there things that you feel that are being kind of lost or misunderstood, that you have that memory from the ground that you'd like to see appreciated or better known?
I think there's a lot of stuff, but then you have to think: is it worth it? Is it worth correcting? Is it worth it? I've tried to in the last is think about before I say something. What's the purpose of saying it? Or are you saying it for what reason? What do you expect to get out of saying something?
Mhm.
So there's not many things that I feel really wrong about that I think I'd say. There's a lot of stuff I might not like or don't think is right or whatever, but it really doesn't matter that much.
I don't really mean so much things that are wrong, that are like right or wrong, but just nuances or
Oh yeah,
memories of,
oh yeah,
that just aren't so appreciated or known, or that have been
oh,
modified. Anything you feel comfortable with that sharing, just to give us
yeah.
greater appreciation.
In the very beginning, I mean, we did all the work ourselves and stuff. I mean, the amount of work and the amount of dedication there were people doing stuff. From cleanup, from cooking, from this, from everything, from building. It doesn't have the same feel anymore like that. Even though there are a lot of people who do, um, the work. All our things are courses are run volunteer, obviously, on managers and cooking. It doesn't have that same feel of like how we were all in this together type of thing.
Hmm.
It's much more mature in that sense. Knowledge is good.
Mm.
Much more mature in that sense. It's people come from all walks. There's just not that type of thing anymore. And all of us in the very beginning, we had this sort of bond of India or Goenkaji of all this. That's sort of like there's a couple of people left and stuff. There's not that many of that anymore. So
Mhm.
it's kind of that type of thing. Very very nostalgic about the old. It was just so different. You know Now I'm talking to bankers about loans and more, yeah, and contractors about finishing jobs. It,
Mm.
and that's what I do there now. So it's a whole different. It's just a different thing, but everything's necessary. Everything grows. Everything changes. So.
I was gonna say that. I mean, is there really, even as a thought experiment, is there another trajectory that this could have taken, where when something goes from being informal and messy, and you have to go halfway around the world to have a course where you don't even have food for the first couple days, and in the cases of what you were describing, to something that is standardized and protocol and institutionalized and standards and all these other things that and permanent centers, like, if that's the route that you want to go, how do you avoid this kind of change taking place?
You can't. I
Yeah.
don't think. It's just not gonna. It's not really gonna happen unless you want to go off in the woods by yourself or something.
Yeah.
It's just the way things are. I'm sure it's when they talk about the Buddha, right? First he has his the five aesthetics, and then he's at monasteries with 8,000, 10,000, monks. So that's what happens.
Yeah, right. And now, with Goenkaji having passed away about 10 years ago now, not only was he such a presence in terms of those who knew him and really spent time with him, versus those who, even while he was alive, didn't have that interaction, or had a very brief interaction while they just heard him on a tape. Now you have an organization moving forward that doesn't have that leader and doesn't have a chosen successor. And so I suppose, as we look at protocols and the standards and this worldwide mission where you have things happening in so many different cultures and countries, that is an added challenge of figuring out what that core mission is and how decisions get made, and everything else as it continues to expand and grow.
Fortunately, it's not my challenge. All I care about is VMC. I stay there. I do my work. I hang out at the meditation center. I'm there 3 days a week at least. So it'd be for somebody else.
Yeah,
as,
good.
as I tell people, they say, "Oh, are you going to build any more?" I said, "I'm not. If you want to, you can go right ahead."
You've kept your vow from all those years before.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Hmm. Are there, And thinking about your memories of where it came from and just imagining a new student, no background, coming, sit in a 10-day course, everything they're hearing and seeing being from the the way things are currently set up without that background, which is wonderful that that opportunity exists. But what about the background that you lived through, about the history that you passed? What about those experiences would you want people to know today if you had a way of being able to impart something from that experience that's generally not as understood or appreciated? What about that would you really want them to bring to life and understand?
Um, I mean, the whole thing that I really would like people to appreciate more about the whole thing is the gratitude that they owe Goenkaji.
Mhm.
That no matter what, that is the essence of this. That none of this would have happened without him, and the gratitude you should have towards him is immense. And that's what I feel is that the people, that what they lose, they don't get. It's hard to have gratitude towards the other thing because that to me was, um, just the most important part of everything.
Gratitude to the person of Goenka.
Gratitude, well, to him for doing all of this. I mean, people don't realize he could have had a very comfortable life. He
Yeah.
didn't do this. He didn't do this for fame, fortune, or anything. He did it to help people. You know,
Mhm.
and you know, he tried his best. Was he perfect? No, but he tried. Everything he did, he tried. It was to make people, um, for people to have a better time, to get a deeper understanding of Dhamma, and to be able to progress. And I mean, that to me is the big thing. But I think that's a very, and I don't mean in like honor or this. I mean real gratitude. For him.
Mhm. Well, Goenka himself certainly had enormous gratitude for Seiju Baken. You just
Right.
hear that effusing out of him. And Goenkaji was, of course, a student of Seiju Baken. You were a student of Goenkaji. So, being a student of Goenkaji, not of the Goenka Vipassana organization, but actually of Goenkaji, because you were so close for so many years, for so long, what shape does your own gratitude have? How would I know it must be hard to think of formulating this, but how would you describe the nature of how you would characterize your gratitude for Goenka?
What was his? What did he want done? He wanted people to be able to meditate. He wanted people to learn this technique. You have to help doing this. You have to surrender to your life towards doing these things, so that his what he wanted done, you're helping him. That's the way to show the gratitude towards him. That's the way. So you want to be able to help more people. Progress, and that's the way to show that's the gratitude I have for him. Because I can't tell you how much it's helped me in my life.
Mhm,
I mean, I was pretty messed up, to say
mhm,
the least.
mhm.
And I've gone through quite a bit over the years. And whatever came my way, I was not perfect in it, but I had the Dhamma, and with the Dhamma, I kept my Shila, I kept myself through it, and I got through everything. And I try to keep doing it. So.
Mhm. And how does it feel for you personally to know that you played some small role in this whole mission and this intercontinental historical development of mindfulness movement?
I'm happy about that. The only one thing I'd say, I have nothing to do with this mindfulness movement.
Okay.
I don't buy that part at all. Okay,
Okay, maybe the wrong terminology,
right?
but,
Because I'm not in business, which the mindfulness movement might be. You know, I read somewhere it's $1 billion industry now.
right, and I don't mean it in that sense. I mean as the exportation of a,
Yeah, I'm
mhm.
very happy. I'm a little, sometimes every once in a while I say, "What is going on here?"
So with that, I think this has really been a great exploration. I'm glad that we were able to go over some of these themes, some of this hidden history. I would say. I hope we get a chance to follow up on some of it. And I know you're not one who really talks and opens up much, so I'm really thankful that you trusted us and came on here to be able to tell your story. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you for having me. I hope I hope it'll be a good experience for people to listen to it.
मन की समता ना छूटे तो सुख शांति अनंत.
We'd like to take this time to thank our generous supporters who have already given. We simply could not continue to provide you with this content and information without the wonderful support of generous donors, listeners, and friends like you. Each episode helps in providing access to one more voice, one more perspective, one more insight. Every donation of any size is greatly appreciated and helps us continue this mission. We greatly appreciate your generosity, which allows us to maintain this platform. Thank you. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects, as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
राग मूल है रोग रूर द्वेष दोष रो मूल मोह मूल पर पंजरो समता मुक्ति मूल जन मन व्यापी विषमता बुझी धर्म की ज्योत सरिता सुखी शांति की सुख्या
Watabaya unyana dadu ya danam biari gane zadu mana wigara besaya na besaya. Oba yarananda da yarananga na yaranaya da yaranam poda ba yaranam